He's claustrophobic. So that was the beginning of the problems, but that was the only time that our stuff never worked.
Well, yeah, but you made us look. We were like Ted Danson and I were walking around smelling like seaweed and dripping for 90% of the. And then Leslie Nielsen, who I loved in that film, you know, and who kept walking around with his fart machine, you know.
I was about to ask about that.
So that's why we had to do so many retakes. Remember, we would come in. And we would be these ghouls, and then Leslie would open the door, and you'd hear this fart, and then we'd have to go cut, you know, because that would be the end.
But that was funny for sure. But the funniest thing was you and Ted Danson in the dressing room after they were made up and they were the ghouls. They rehearsed their lines as if they were Southern hillbillies. Oh, now we begged you, please do one take like that, just so everybody would crack up. I have a little bit of it on video, yeah, of you and Ted doing your lines as Southern hillbillies.
That would be great.
Anyone else?
Mr. Atkins again.
Yeah.
May I ask what your most memorable experience on any of the John Carpenter movies would be? Are you allowed to talk about that?
Oh yeah, sure, we can talk about that. But John was wasn't fun to work with. George was fun to work with. George was like a big bear and kind of easy going, sit in his chair and wait till the place half burned down before he sat down. But he was embracing and like Scott said, is very open to suggestions and stuff. And John Carpenter is exactly the opposite. His kind of asocial, he's not very skilled at dealing with people or talking with actors, or so he's difficult to, I think, to work with. But I think he made some wonderful films, and the most memorable film for me of his is not any that I was in, but I think he did the best job on Starman with Bridges and Karen Allen. It was a very human story, and he cared about the people, and it was really nice. He always seemed to be a little more interested in the rubber of a movie than he was in the people of the story.
You mean the effects?
Yeah, the effects. Yeah, and he's a good musician, and he's a hell of a director. I found little pleasure in working with him as I have in most everything else I did, and certainly with George. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. No comparison.
There was a guy way over there that had a question. Sam, yeah, that guy, yeah.
In any of the films that you've worked with, you always shoot a lot more footage than what's in the movie. There's sometimes effects and scenes that are planned that don't happen. Is there any specific thing that each of you have, a performance you did that maybe didn't make the final cut, or an effect you wanted to do that didn't work or you just couldn't do?
No, George, you know, we would suggest things to George. I mean, I think 80% of the effects are things that we came up with. You know, George, how about if we drive a screwdriver to a zombie's ear? Yeah, okay, yeah, great. So then we go in. But there was one scene that the reason that Gaylen's scene is in that movie with her in the mirror and making herself all beautiful. I walked in the office one day and you were actually typing a letter to George, sort of not begging, but suggesting to him that is needed, that scene, because you needed a moment or something.
He was going to cut it. Right.
Oh, yeah. So that's why that scene is still in the movies. We're talking about things that didn't make it. That made it because of her effort, yeah.
Any of you guys, any performances or? What about you, Scott? Any performances that might have not have made the cut that you went, man, I wish people saw those chops.
No, what?
Did you do anything that was cut?
Not that I recall, no. There was one thing I wanted to tell you, which I just forgot.
thing that George wrote for the film was the pots and pans scene. That wasn't in the script at all, and George and I had to sit down at some point in the film where I said, you know, these guys are really ganging up on her, and it's getting really. I said we have to do something about that, and George said, okay, well let me think about it, and that's how I'm going to fly that helicopter scene came about, because that wasn't in the film at all. So there were two things there. I mean, that's what was wonderful about George. If you presented an idea, the script was not ever cement. I mean, it was cement in that, you know, there was a shooting script and he had an idea and a very important story to tell and beginning, middle, and end. But he was so open about, oh, you want to try something, or or your character's moving this way, and this feels logical to you, and he was open to, you know, seeing those moments through, which is really, you know, pretty stunning and brilliant that a director who is also the writer, you know, can be that flexible and see possibilities that an actor brings to it. And I remember during Creepshow, it was always like that. I mean, he had these real thoroughbreds that were Harry Nye, and I mean, I can't remember all the actors, but in that, especially Ed Harris, and oh my God, you know, who plays Mark Twain, Hal Holbrook. Yeah, because, I mean, you and people who really had done their you know, they've gotten their roots on stage and theater, and he listened to them. And you know, Adrian Barbeau would say, you know, no, I think she would do this, and George would go, okay, let's try it. And Hal Holbrook, they really came away. I'll never forget how Hal Holbrook and Fritz came away from when they were filming and saying how much respect that they had for George after doing that film. They had no idea how good he was working with actors.
For sure.
Question?
Here you go, right?
What was shooting Night Riders like?
Who did Night Riders?
What's your name?
Pardon?
What's your real name? Marhol. What was it like?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Well, it was fun, you know, riding those dirt bikes. That was a lot of fun. It rained a lot, so we had a lot of time off.
80% of the time.
And we were staying at a Holiday Inn, right? Okay. So at the Holiday Inn, they always had these huge vats of shrimp, okay? The only problem was that the crew and the cast would go there and eat it all up. So after a while, they just discontinued it. They were not happy with us. Oh, do you know who Ken Hickson is? Never mind.
It was the greatest summer of my life. Riding motorcycles, wearing armor, fencing, groupies. We were rock stars, what can I say? It was just the greatest summer. And, you know, we're shooting Camelot, jousting on motorcycles, you know. You know, you think that would put asses in the seats, you know. But it's one of my favorite, it was my favorite movie for a long time. And anybody who knows George says it's his life story. That's about George. That was his biography. Fight or yield, you know, I mean, those principles, Ed Harris's character was essentially George, you know. This is called The Friends of George Romero. I mean, that's one of the best things we can say about him.
I want to say something. This is fun. A couple weeks ago at Cinema Wasteland, a whole bunch of us from Night of the Living Dead and other of George's films were there. And Richard Ritchie, who in Night of the Living Dead, he was Rudy's cousin, the guy I mentioned earlier. He's the one that gets shot in the chest whenever the hands come through the windows in Night of the Living Dead, and they're fighting over the gun. And he gets shot in the chest, and then finally he gets shot in the head. So he's the first zombie that shows that yes, it takes a shot to the head to kill them. So Richard had the table next to mine, and what you might not know about the Night of the Living Dead remake, Tom's directing this film, but Russ and I had to work our ass off the whole time to keep the money coming, because the distribution company kept threatening to stop the production. So then, meantime, there were tornadoes in the south, and the rains came up. the East Coast, and so we're swamped in rain, and we're trying to finish this picture on the deadline. So we're shooting, you know, all the wrap-ups. And I would say to George, you know, we should have a zombie. We're trying to dress it up as best we can because we're running out of money, time, and everything else. And I said, we ought to have a zombie with an IV hanging on his arm. And George would say, well, go to, you know, see the special effect. And I'd go and they would make that. And then I said, we ought to have a, you know, Marilyn ate an insect in Night of the Living Dead. We ought to have a zombie eating a mouse. So I'd go to the special effects guys and they'd make a mouse. So Richard said, I had to eat a mouse in that picture. He said, I said, well, it was my fault because I went, I had the special effects guys make that mouse. He said, it was really funny to have a furry thing like that in my mouth. I said, you ought to be glad we didn't put a gerbil up your ass. And I just got a chance, you know, George gets swamped with all of you people wanting his autograph, and I got a chance to talk to him for a few minutes yesterday, and I told him that story, and he cracked up.
One little tidbit that maybe you might enjoy just about George. You remember the scene in the housing project in the basement where Peter and Roger discover all these zombies eating each other? I will never forget that. Because we were upstairs, and so we were called down to the set, and we walked in there, and I looked at that because it looked so real. I said, George, that is disgusting. He looked at me and went, yeah, I know.
That zombie with the IV hanging out of his arm was the film's accountant. The accountant.
Oh, was it Richard Jeffrey?
Yeah.
Well, I think we have time for one more question, so make it good.
Evolution of the smart zombie between all the dead.
I'm sorry?
The evolution of the smart zombie between all the dead movies, from Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead. Was that an impact original thought to do between them all, or was that just something you guys came up with?
But I think the evolution of the zombies getting smarter, I think that's completely George. I think that's completely George's idea of writing. You know, there's always something going on in George's films. There's a great documentary called American Nightmare where it talks about what was going on in the world when certain movies were made. There's a whole section on Night of the Living Dead and what was going on in the world. But I think George was always aware of that, and that added meat to his story, to his scripts, was something else, some secret that was in his mind going on. And I think part of it was just, yeah, I mean, if they're going to do George sells bumper stickers that say, I don't know if they're on this table now, it says fast zombies suck. Okay? And I think part of that is because of the remake of Dawn, when he says, when you're dead, you continue to disintegrate and die, and you don't become a superhero, you know? They made them run in the remake, but I can't blame Zach because you got to make them scary. You got to keep the zombies scary. But I think it was George's writing. If they're going to be around, then they're going to learn stuff. That was the whole reason for Bub in Day of the Dead, was to illustrate that they may have a skill, you know. So.
Well, you know, there was also an earlier script to Day of the Dead. You know that the Day of the Dead that was actually made is not the Day of the Dead that George was going to make. And that original script, did you ever see it?
That was Raiders of the Lost Ark.
It was it was more like
I mean, it was a big epic.
It was epic, yeah. But the zombies really then became the working class for the population, and it was more like, what was the film with Harrison Ford and you know where people lived on the top floors? What's that film? Harrison Ford, you know, it's the classic film where people live in the Blade Runner. Thank you. It was more like Blade Runner. Yes. So it was more like Blade Runner, and the zombies became the worker population. So he had them in factories, in you know, the Roboton kind of things, which is very, very interesting idea. And then the final production of Day of the Dead ended up becoming much smaller.
They kept
and
cutting the budget.
The budget. It was all about the budget, but the original one was quite prophetic. And really, when you think about it, said a lot about our times then.
One quick thing. George was invited to the Academy of Arts and Sciences in Beverly Hills, this was a few years ago, to talk on the state of horror in the U.S. And a wonderful, funny thing happened. I'm standing outside and we're having a cigarette, and George Lucas walks up to him, acting like he's a teenager. And he goes, "George, oh my God, it's so incredible that you're here." And it's George Lucas, and I'm just smiling going, wow.
That's a funny thing. They both grew up in the Parkchester section of New York, and George used to have to rent 16mm films in those days. So, and Lucas and George Romero used to try to outdo each other to grab the latest 16mm print of whatever, and then one of them would be hanging onto the print, and the other one couldn't get it. So just a detail.
Well, based off the George Lucas story, I mean, as if it was already confirmed enough by this entire room, obviously everybody loves George. And thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you.